everybody, and welcome to this month's vlogcast. I'm really delighted to have Gabor Posta with me. Gabor is a young patient and I think has a really interesting story to tell us about his pathway from symptoms, diagnosis and treatment. Gabor, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me on this vlogcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Would you like to tell me how you came to be diagnosed in the first instance?
Of course, yeah.
It's how old you were when you were diagnosed?
Yeah, even younger than now. Yeah, so it was quite a long time ago now. I mean, it would have been about 2008 or 2009. So I think I was 16 or 17 at the time. And the sort of diagnosis was a bit by chance, I suppose, because they were investigating me at the doctors, having had some various sort of, I suppose, gastro issues, so sort of nausea, vomiting on an almost daily basis, particularly in the mornings. And so basically I went to various different specialists and then eventually had a blood test. And so the gastro doctor said, hey, FYI, this doesn't really explain what's going on with you in terms of the nausea and vomiting, but you need to get this looked at by a hematologist, because of course it was the usual story of, high platelets, high red blood cells. And then, I got referred on to a hematologist. And then I think the story is quite similar to that of most MPN patients. I went for a consultation, had a few bloods done, I had a bone marrow test done in the pelvis, and then all of that confirmed that I was JAK2 positive. I was initially diagnosed with ET, but then that was about 4 or 5 years later revised to PV due to their high hematocrit and higher red blood cell count.
Gosh, and how does age 16, how did that impact your life? Because that's a really difficult time to suddenly find that you are diagnosed with something that needs treatment and isn't curable. How did that happen?
Yeah, it was an interesting one because, of course, as you say, it does impact you. But at the same time, once I was sort of given all the information that accompanied the ET diagnosis, and I wasn't really having any sort of significant issues as a result of the ET. I hadn't had any blood clots or anything like that, thankfully. They said because I was young, I only had to take aspirin and no other treatment was required. Then actually, ultimately, when they boiled it down to the sort of basics, all I needed to do was take aspirin every day, go for blood tests every few months, and that was it, at least initially. And so actually, I would say it probably didn't impact me too much other than in that sort of immediate situation. It wasn't too, I suppose, wasn't too difficult to deal with. It did have some knock-on impacts in terms of what I decided eventually to do as a career and similar. But I have to say, I suppose I was quite lucky in that I wasn't really suffering any major issues from it. And so for the most part, certainly a diagnosis, it seemed like quite a straightforward thing to manage from a medical perspective. Although, of course, as you say, it's incurable. So, it was sort of looking far into the distance and knowing that I wouldn't be rid of it. But in that sort of instance, it actually wasn't too bad from what I remember, thankfully.
You said that it had an impact on your chosen career. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Sure, of course. So originally of course, like everyone, went through a few different career aspirations, but I was quite set on working in the emergency services for a long time. I was quite keen on becoming a paramedic. And then basically as a result of a combination of realizing that I don't do well with shift work in terms of, the night shifts and irregular hours and lack of sleep, combined with, the potential for my MPN to get worse in future and to kind of, I suppose, try and address the lifestyle factors that I could to try and reduce the risk associated with my MPN. I decided that maybe, a sort of quite stressful shift work career wasn't necessarily the best move. But I was always interested in the sciences and maths, and so ended up going down the route of engineering. Ended up going into nuclear engineering, which is kind of more of a standard office-based job, but I absolutely love it. So yeah, I'm really happy that I've ended up there, and I think it was the right choice, certainly.
And have you remained just on aspirin, or have you had to go on to any of the normal MPN medications?
It's only escalated a bit. So when my ET was reclassified as PEV around 2012, 2013, I started having venesections as well, in addition to the aspirin and the regular blood tests. And actually, that was what helped me put two and two together, because I realized that the migraines that had plagued me for years and years as a child, as early as probably age 10, age 12, were actually caused by my MPN, because pretty much as soon as I'd had my first few venesections, it was a sort of immediate stop to the migraines with aura that I was regularly having, which really was a big improvement. But other than that, thankfully, I haven't had to start taking hydroxycarbamide, interferon, anything like that. At the moment, it's just a case of venesections every 1 to 6 months, depending on the year. It sort of fluctuates. Aspirin and regular blood tests, so pretty minimal, to be honest. So again, I count myself quite lucky from that perspective.
That's a wonderfully positive way of looking at it. Now, I know you've been part and parcel of the young persons network group. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what that means for young people?
Of course. I suppose one of the things that most young MPN patients probably can sort of relate to is when you get diagnosed, you start to look at information online. And I think it's starting to slowly improve now, but certainly in the past, it was all very much focused on sort of patients aged maybe 50 and above. And there was really very little information out there for young patients. So I think it's just quite a nice opportunity to, I suppose, put together some resources for the younger people in the MPN community who get diagnosed at a young age and who maybe feel that the information that is currently out there at the moment doesn't really directly apply to them at the moment, or they find that they're not getting what they want from it. Whether that's more the sort of medical and clinical side of things, long-term prognosis, etc., through to the sort of more practical aspects of everyday life. You may find that you have a different stage of life to navigate in your teens, 20s, 30s, and how your MPN affects that compared to someone who's older than that.
That sounds great. And the group, as I understand it, is growing, and it's on an online basis. Can you possibly tell us a bit about that, so that anybody who's watching this would know how to connect in?
Absolutely. So I might not actually be the best person to signpost them, but I believe if you go onto the MPN Voice website, there is signposting towards the young persons group. At the moment, the format is a Facebook group, which anyone is welcome to join. And basically, it just acts as a sort of, I suppose, a forum, an opportunity to ask questions from like-minded peers who may either have previously experienced the same thing as you, or may currently be going through a similar situation. But certainly, I think that's the best first port of call is the MPN Voice website, and then signing up to that Facebook group.
That's really helpful, Gabor, and I hope that the group continues to grow, because, as you rightly say, there are a lot of young people diagnosed now with MPNs, and even some children who are being diagnosed with MPNs, and that's because medical science has come on so much, and blood tests are able to pick things up much quicker than they were perhaps even when I was diagnosed 32 years ago. So how do you see the future? Where would you like to see the future with MPNs?
Oh, good question. I suppose on the one hand, kind of continuing along the lines of what we were discussing earlier about young patients, I think it will just be great to kind of continue to see more research into the young MPN patient side of things, whether that's, again, being perhaps better able to predict long-term prognosis, or just being better equipped to kind of deal with the challenges of being a young MPN patient. Even something as simple as the choice of drugs that you may end up getting for the MPN treatment, it can influence how you fare longer term. So I think it'd be quite interesting to see a bit more of that. I suppose more widely, I'm quite interested in the sort of new gene mutations that they've been looking at. You know, when I was first diagnosed with JAK2 positive ET, back then MPL and calreticulin were not even on the radar of anyone. So I suppose I'm quite looking forward to finding out more about where that heads. Perhaps a better ability to tailor treatment to individuals based on their genetic makeup. I think that would be quite a nice thing to see becoming more widespread and more effective, I suppose. But certainly it seems to be headed in the right direction. So I suppose from my side, it's more of the same.
No, I agree with you, but and I also think I was at a forum up in Newcastle recently, and they were talking about the research that's been going on, and I must say at the end of that, I thought, my goodness, the future is bright for people with MPNs. I think the biggest struggle for most young people is fatigue, and real extreme. I mean, we know it's not tiredness. Fatigue is quite different. Have you ever suffered from that? Has that been something that, and if you have, I wonder if you could give some tips to other young people who have fatigue, you know, in their teens or early 20s, how to cope with it.
Of course. Again, I think I've been quite fortunate on that front. I do suffer from fatigue occasionally, but certainly not as bad as it could be. I suppose things that have helped me manage it is just making sure that I do sleep a lot. You know, on average, I would say I do tend to get 7 to 9 hours a night where possible. You know, sometimes I don't manage that, but I would say that is the sort of average amount of sleep that I do try and get. That does help. Exercise, I know it's counterintuitive, but I tend to find that does help with fatigue. Getting some fresh air, spending time outside, I think that tends to help me a bit, just in terms of perking me up, I suppose, if nothing else. But I have to say, I've probably struggled more with other symptoms of PV, particularly things like itching. I still get quite a lot of headaches. Thankfully, not migraines anymore, which has been a game changer. But the headaches are still quite frustrating. And then I also have tinnitus, which interestingly I didn't think was previously linked, but then I was looking online. There seemed to be some indications that there might be links, and that it was quite interesting comparing notes with the other young patients and finding that actually other people do experience the same thing, and perhaps there is some sort of link back to MPNs there. So I suppose I'm not the best placed person to advise others on fatigue, but I think what you tend to find out there as advice has worked for me. Easier said than done, inevitably, and you have some better days, some worse days. But yeah, I've been quite fortunate on that front, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think it must be quite difficult. You know, I know you said you were diagnosed at 16. You know, in educational settings, to actually put your hand up and say, you know, I'm tired, I've got fatigue, and not be thought of as somebody who's actually burning the candle at both ends, and have that voice, have that strength to have that voice to talk to tutors, to talk to friends, to say, look, you know, if I'm tired, it's not because I've been doing too much, it's because I've got an MPN. Do you agree with that? Because it's quite a thing, isn't it, to be able to say to somebody, an authority figure in terms of education, you know, I have got this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm sure it's not easy. Thankfully, I've not had fatigue issues to the extent that I've had to do that, but I know of many people who had, and I suppose it just comes down to making sure that you advocate for yourself. You know, there's ultimately no shame in it. If it's a symptom of your MPN, you know, it's not really your fault that you're experiencing that. So it's just about being open and honest about it. And sure, maybe a small fraction of people might not believe you, but I would say on the whole, people do tend to be pretty understanding if you sort of explain to them the background and the context. I can see them having much of an issue with it. Certainly, again, from a work perspective, occasionally, you know, having to go for a venesection during working hours or a blood test or anything like that. They've always been very understanding. They're always happy for me to make up the hours another time. So, yeah, I think just be your own advocate, and try and not worry too much about what people think.
Very wise words. Thank you so much. This has been really inspiring for a younger patient to be able to talk about their experience. And hopefully in the years to come, we'll be talking to you again to do a catch up as to, well, it won't be me then, but you know, so we know
You
where
never
you
know.
are. So we know where you are in your journey with an MPN, because there's an awful lot that can happen, I think, in the next 10, 15 years.
Absolutely.
It's exciting times. And so thank you. And I'm sure everybody will agree with me. It's been a really interesting chat with you. Thank you, Gabor.
My pleasure, Nona. Thank you so much for having me.